If you enjoy part 1 of this interview, please download my app, Magic Masterclass, available on the App Store, and you'll be able to get access to part 2. You'll also have the opportunity to learn some incredible magic tricks. A final thank you to my friend Neb, who has edited and put the following together.
Hey, hello.
TV.
Video, hang on, that's me.
Oh. I guess particularly when you look at stage, you're constantly innovating. It's constantly changing. It's forever getting better. When I saw your current show, Showman, arguably that is my favourite show you've ever done. So it's a bit of a broad question to start, but where does that search for innovation and creativity come from? Or how do you get to those creative ideas?
I think there's maybe a couple of thoughts of that. First of all, it's all very nice of you to say that. Thank you. That's nice. So, accepting that all that's remotely true, then two things. The main thing is probably I don't work on my own. So there's three of us that do it. So there's me, and there's a guy called Andy Nyman, who is an actor who's done a bunch of stuff, but we've known each other for years, and he also loves the stuff that I do and does the same kind of thing, although not professionally so much anymore. And Andrew O'Connor, who has a long career in television, and the two of them write the shows with me, and they then direct the show. So that's a big part of it, because when there's three of you that have worked together for a long time, you both have, you do have a clear sense of what you know works and what you all kind of want, and there's a great sort of shorthand because you've worked together forever. You don't need to kind of be having to explain any of that to each other, and we're also really different, so we all bring very different things to it. And if we all like something, then that's normally a good sign. So it's a very helpful thing to learn, I think, to work creatively with other people. So that's very helpful. And then at sort of a personal level, I think I've always tried to pursue things that I find interesting and valuable, because a show's going to go on for months and months and months, or a TV show might take like 8 months to make. So I kind of want to feel it's something I really kind of believe in, and that the point of doing it is interesting, that the heart of the thing is interesting, which has nothing to do with the magic or anything like that. Just it's kind of whatever the heart of the story is or the point of doing it. So that's very different from just trying to churn out the same sort of thing again and again because it's proved popular in the past. I've never really done that, and that's helped me a lot as well, because then things have grown up with me and changed with me. And like Showman is a show that I'm doing now, and I'm 51, hence the cardigan. But I wouldn't have done it when I was 30. It wouldn't make any sense. So I think being tuned into that and allowing something to grow up with you, that's very helpful as well. And luckily, because we all know each other and trust each other, we're all on board with that. Normally the projects will start with me saying I'd like it to be about this kind of thing, and then we all work on that and find our own responses to it, and then bring that to the mix.
When you're being creative, when you're in a sort of creative rut, what does a day look like for you? Do you have a process? Do you have a routine? Is there a particular way you operate?
Oh, it depends what I'm doing. If I'm writing, which is like maybe a favorite thing to do, writing and painting are very solitary things for me, and I love that. So if I'm painting, I'll be in my studio. If I'm writing, I'll be probably sat in a cafe somewhere. But I really enjoy that. A creative day on a TV show or a stage show is always with other people. It's always a discussion. So we'll be sitting around. So like for the stage shows, there's a month of that, a month of us sitting in a room with ideas that are being born out of, or this is what the heart of the show is. So what things could you do that would demonstrate and show that and tie in with that? And then just a few great tricks that we think, oh, wouldn't it be amazing to do this because we've never done that? And we draw up long lists, and we put in titles for each trick on post-it notes, and then you put them on a big board, and then you're like, okay, that doesn't work because we've got a short trick followed by a short trick, so let's put that one there, and that's too many long tricks, and that's a great beginning, that's an end. So you're moving things around until you got the shape of a show. So we'll be doing that for like a month and a bit, and then we have a month and a bit of rehearsing it in a room, right? So then we're getting it up on its feet and finding the actual words I'm going to say, and letting it come into proper shape. So those are like two really different things. In fact, the thing I really do like about my job is that it will vary. Like how I'm spending my days will change massively. It might be sitting in my front room talking with these people that are also like my dearest friends, or I'm on my own getting on with stuff that I find really rewarding, or I'm up, doing a show on stage, and like everything lasts a few months, or a month to a few months. This is a long tour. It's like a year and a bit. This has been a long one, but generally speaking, it fluctuates and changes, and that's nice. I think that's one of the best parts of it. So yeah, it really varies, but certainly for the magic side of things, it's always a group.
So just to go back to when you're in a room writing, specifically for, say, the theatre show, will you start with a story or a message that you want to get across, or will you start with a particular trick you want to do?
Oh, that's interesting. There's lots of starting points, actually. Sometimes it's a bit of method that's just like we've come across somewhere, it's just delicious, and then it builds up. Those are always the ones that work least well, and the ones we end up taking out. And if we don't take them out on the show, they're always the ones that come out when we film the show, and we have to take stuff out of that to fit into the time slot for TV. So it's the worst place to start is with a method, but occasionally it's that. But I think the best tricks or routines or pieces or whatever start normally with a sort of an image that we like, right? So it's not a trick, it's not a method. It's just a sort of it's like a theatrical moment. Like in one show, we thought the idea of a member of the audience sort of hypnotized, dressed in a smock, walking through the audience like a zombie, pointing and finding her way to somebody or pointing somebody out. We just thought, oh, that's a really compelling thing. So then it's like, how do we make that into a trick? Like, what could that be? So sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's just like a sort of just a little bit of theatre, just a thing. You thought, oh, that would be really cool. Which is probably, like in that case, that was definitely more interesting than the trick that came with it. It was really about that moment. Yeah. So sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's just like a sort of just like half an image for something, or maybe, sometimes we think, oh, so that's like maybe two people on either side of a screen, and they're both doing something and they can't see each other, but maybe they're making the same actions, or they're just like things that we think would be kind of cool to watch. And then there are those sort of great ideas within magic that have been used a lot over, like in this show, Showman, there's a classic sort of magic trick where people put objects in bags, and then they mix up, and you can work out which object belongs to which person. And we just use that as a starting point. I mean, it doesn't sound very exciting, but I don't think it is on its own, but it's just an idea that's stuck around for a long time. Or reading people's thoughts, answering people's questions that they've written. That's a very classic mentalist image. So, you're holding up an envelope with a question that someone has written, and you're able to answer their question out in the audience. So we'll just take some of those great ideas that have stuck around and then build our versions of those tricks, which normally are quite different from what the originals are, or originals were, or maybe they'll keep a sense of them. But yeah, so it's certainly, it's not starting with the method as much as possible, because that never really works. Starting with a compelling sort of image or idea. It's often hard to kind of go, well, here's the heart of the show. Like the Showman is about how the things in life that make us feel isolated normally, like when life's going badly, actually the very things that tend to join us up, the things that we share, like that is such a big part of the experience of being human, that it's actually the things that connect us to other people, even though when we're in those places, it can normally feel quite isolating. So like, how do you turn that into a magic trick? Well, you sort of can't really, but you can take little bits of it, and you can let each trick have a little sort of dig into one area of that, and then the words that you find in between and the bits of script and the way you introduce it. And sometimes just me talking, like there's a lot that I'm just talking about stuff in the show, and it gradually comes together. And then you kind of realize at the end that each part of it meant something along this long journey. And I think if you can get that right, that's a good thing. And if you can get the balance of it just right, so people feel they've made those connections for themselves rather than just being told it as well, that's important. Otherwise you feel a bit bashed over the head with it. So it's
sorry to interrupt. One thing that you do time and time again is get across a message or a theme through your show, but not in a way that feels contrived. And that is like a really difficult thing to do with magic, I think, specifically. So I guess just to revert back to what you were saying, and you achieve that by sprinkles through the show as opposed to anything.
Well, I think again, if you look at really good comedians, they often do a thing where they stand-up comedy can be quite good at showing you a way of seeing the world and dealing with frustrations in it in a healthier way, right? Because the comedian might be talking about problems with their partner, or why the toaster doesn't work, or just everyday struggles that we all kind of share in. And sometimes they can be philosophically quite rich. I mean, sometimes can be really helpful thoughts in there. But a thing that comics also do is they deflect everything back against themselves. They like make themselves look a bit stupid. All their opinions they're giving are sort of wildly over the top, or they make themselves look like idiots. So you don't mind actually being told ideas about how we might think about things better. Like that's quite a common thing amongst good comedians. But again, the trouble with magic is like this: here's this guy that can click his fingers and make anything happen. And if he's also got that power in inverted commas, and he's going to start telling us how to live, like it's just all way too much. So you have to really find ways of making yourself vulnerable and deflecting stuff against yourself, finding ways of introducing struggle rather than just I can do anything. So that's one part of it. And then it's like it buys you a certain amount of room to then talk about stuff that is important to you, but might also be helpful for an audience. And that's not everyone's style. Like that's my style, because it's all stuff I think about. It's not everybody's. But yeah, if you just were doing a trick and then said, so this can teach us all to be more present in the moment or whatever, it could be really annoying. So the key is to let people find those connections for themselves. I mean, that's important anyway in life, isn't it? If you're trying to get an idea across to somebody and you want them to, and we all know what it's like to have somebody just talking at us and you just switch off. Whereas then, when people do say something in just the right way and then you go away and you think about it and it just sort of, you feel like something clicks. Those are the best times. That's when films are the most moving, when we make those connections for ourselves. And we go, oh God, that thing that happened right at the beginning, that was all part of this. And the whole thing is a dream or whatever. Like that, you don't want to be told it necessarily. If you work it out for yourself, it can be very impactful. So yeah, that's a real balance. Also why it helps having a director, because they can watch it and feel with the audience like what everyone's feeling and know when those things are landing properly. Sometimes it's hard to judge that if you're just writing and performing it on your own.
One thing, just to change tack slightly, that you're known for people that have sort of worked with you, is you have a great ability to let go of great ideas because they're not right. They're just not right. And that's a really hard skill that I think we can all learn to be better about. Is that something you learned through your experience of doing, or have you just always been able to kill your darlings?
I think it comes from if you're doing a show that has a clear through line, or you want the audience to take something away that isn't just how did he do that. If it's just how did he do that, then just do a million great things. Why not? But if there's a sense of a message or a heart to the show that isn't just the mystery of the trick, then it's actually really important that everything serves that. Otherwise, it could just become really confusing. If you just watched a film that was just a bunch of scenes, that didn't really go anywhere, it just sort of wouldn't really, doesn't matter how nice the scenes were, it just wouldn't really, just wouldn't add up to anything. So once that is in your mind, then it's really important that everything points in the right direction. The question of why am I doing this thing is at every level, like at every level of method. Why am I picking this thing up? Why am I looking this way? Why am I doing that? Why is this thing in the show? What does it serve? Why am I even doing a show? Like, what's the point of the show? What is the message? Why am I standing here risking looking like an idiot? What is it that I do want to risk as a person or a performer? What's the thing that might make me look stupid if people didn't like it? All those are really important questions to ask and bring into, I think, a show. It's a bit different if you're doing close up, of course, but in a show that people are paid good money, they're going to sit for a couple of hours and watch. So once you've got that in your head, then it's not hard to let things go that don't really fit it. You can try and make them, try and bend them or change the scripting or the framing and make them sit well if you really like them. But it's not really as hard as it sounds. And I think it's from doing a bunch of shows that do have a clear message, or at least some sort of overarching theme. You sort of get used to it. You'll put that on the back burner, and then might do it in the next show, or it might be something to sort of fall back on if you have to take something else out later. So it's all good. It's all fine. And as I've said, just by adding more magic, you're not improving a magic show at all. So very often you make decisions that are either going to serve the show magically or serve it emotionally, and there might be very different things. And for me, I'll always go with the emotional reason, and that doesn't mean like saccharine or schmaltzy. It doesn't mean that, but just whatever that emotional reason is, whether it's impact or is something that's poignant or sweet or is funny or whatever. It's really important to remember, again, why are you doing this thing? It's to create certain emotions, right? Because you've got a theater audience. They may think they're there to watch magic, but they're not really. It's not, that's not ultimately what it is. That wouldn't be very interesting. So you have to serve these other things that are ultimately more important. And that makes it a lot easier just to let go of an idea if it doesn't serve those things. And again, I said all the things that were born out of great methods that we fell in love with are always the things that just get dropped eventually.
When you look back now at, say, your very first stage show, do you look back with fondness, or do you look back and go, oh, I wish I'd done that differently?
I don't very often look back at them. And if I do, it's probably both. Like I find myself a little bit, I find that my voice a bit irritating and odd, probably on TV and stage. I think I just spoke in a different way. And when I watch the old stage shows, possibly because Andy Nyman was working a lot with me, and when Andy performs, he's like a little fighter on stage, like a little prize fighter. It's that feel. And I probably had absorbed a lot of that from him and from his direction. So I find myself a bit too talk a bit too quickly, and there's something a bit tinny and piercing in my voice that I don't like. And compared to now on stage, I'm far more relaxed, and I'm happy to let the audience come to me a bit rather than me feeling I'm always sort of pushing to get to them. But I don't like mind that, because that's totally appropriate to who I was at that age, and so there's a fondness for it too. But I sort of I'm pleased that it's got beyond that. I used to find myself a bit annoying when I'd watch the shows back on TV. So I was like, oh, just slow down, just relax, relax a bit. And a big thing that's changed there. I had a show in the show in New York that I did, and there was a trick that involved like if I messed something up at the beginning, the whole trick wouldn't work, and it was quite a long trick. And I did this. So one night I went out and I made this mistake at the beginning. I was just a bit sloppy with it, and then I knew I've got like 4 revelations, like 4 like little climaxes, and none of them are going to work. So I was desperately thinking, how can I stop and start this again? But it feels like nothing's happened. And if I did, it would draw attention to all the wrong things. And as I'm thinking this, the routine's just, carrying on down the line, and I'm sweating. And then you start to think that everyone that's watching you has gone from like oh, we like this guy, to just, what a dick. And like, they can just see through you and like, you feel like such a fraud. It's just horrible. So 4 of these things just, failed. End of the trick, failed. And then the next gag that came got exactly the same laugh it normally did, which meant, oh, they're fine. They're all back on track and they're not sitting there hating me. Oh, that's good. Then the second night, I made exactly the same mistake and had exactly the same problem. But now I knew, at the end, I know they won't mind so much now, because this is what happened yesterday. But how stupid, I made the same mistake again. So I wasn't as bothered by it. And then I did the same thing the third night. So it happened 3 nights in a row, exactly the same mistake. And by the third night, I was sort of kind of enjoying it. And I was like narrating it a bit, like, oh, I've definitely messed this up and this isn't going to work. You're all going to hate me. And blah, blah. But I was fine with it. And I kind of knew that it wasn't like the end of the show or anything. And people going, oh, the night we did it, this thing didn't work, is actually fine. Like, it might be really exciting, long as you deal with it graciously and don't start blaming blaming your volunteers or whatever. And what that really left me with, the only reason why I've mentioned all that is it took like the last little bit of tension for me out of my relationship with the audience. Like, there's always a bit of you, if you're trying to fool them at some level, that there's like a little bit of slight antagonism in the relationships, particularly if things start to go bad and then you start to panic a bit and you suddenly feel like you're in this relationship with the audience, which you're not at all, but it's what it feels like. And through that experience, I was left with, it's like a little bit of steam in a good way had gone out of it. And I thought, oh, it's all fine. So now what if I decided I was just going to love the audience before I go out? Like, what if that was my state of mind? Like, I'm just going to love them rather than I've got to fool them or but I've got to get through the show or whatever. What if I just started going to love you? And I've since found out that Howard Thurston, who's a very famous American magician from 100 years ago, had like a mantra in his head of "I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you" before going out on stage, and it made a difference, because I know it all sounds a bit sappy, but it can make a difference, because it can then affect, if there are ideas that you're trying to communicate to people. There's a big difference between that feeling just like your bit of script you've got to get through and stuff you really want them to take away and you really want to mean to them because you actually care about them. So I've totally forgotten like what you asked or why we're talking about this now, but it was a very helpful thing in terms of that relationship, in terms of what I learned and then what I felt I could bring with me every night. And that also the whole, I guess the whole thing of vulnerability comes with that. But it's a very nice, it's a nice place to be. But that's like, after 20 years of doing it as well, in a way it sounds really obvious, like, well, couldn't you think of that right at the beginning? But it's hard to, but I look for those things that are just going on quietly underneath. I think they're often the most interesting parts of performing. And although I don't know whether anybody seeing the show the night before or that night would have noticed the difference in me, they'd have noticed the difference in the trick not working. But somehow when there's lots of those sort of things going on together, they do just add up to something that I think does just change something in the air.
So how do you get a message in your magic without it appearing contrived?
It's really important. But do you know what? Sometimes you don't find it until late. So when I did the Broadway show, Secret, and in the UK it toured us, and it was called Underground, but it was the same show, and it was all best bits from previous shows, right? And because that would all be brand new for a Broadway audience, but when it toured here, we said it was a best of. So we took all these bits from previous shows, which meant the show wasn't born with a message behind it. It was just born out of material, and then we somehow had to make it about something. And that was really difficult because we had to kind of crowbar almost like some sort of message into it. And sometimes it happens surprisingly late. The thing that the whole show seems to be about and breathe from its inside sometimes is something you find at the end. So in that show, I remember thinking, this is sort of about, once I got over just done the show for a bit, and had lots of different bits and different meanings, and then it suddenly got, oh, this is actually about how the stories that we tell ourselves about the world are just not what's real. They're just stories that we're living out. And like when a magician shows you a trick, and you're fooled by it, you realize that the story you've been telling yourself doesn't add up to the whole picture. Like there was more going on that you missed, right? Some stuff you missed. But that's actually a really important lesson for life, right? Because we have this infinite number of stuff coming at us all the time. And in order to navigate through life and make any sense of it, we have to edit and delete and make up a story and then work with that story. And we always mistake the story for reality. We always think it's the truth. It's not, it's just a story. And things that upset us and problems that we have, they're not caused by the things in the world themselves. It's the story that we're telling ourselves. It's the way we're responding to them. And someone else might respond very differently. So there's your proof. It's not the thing itself. It's just how you respond. Someone else might not be upset at all by that thing. So anyway, that came quite late. And then you can go, all right, that's what the show's about. And then you can just sort of find bits of script here and there, or lift that bit out a bit more and just point something a little bit more here, use certain language there that then you pick up later on. And suddenly there's a sense of it having a through line, which it didn't have at all. So that was definitely with that show, we did that. So that's one way of doing it. Sometimes it can happen really late, and you just look back at the whole thing and you go, this is what this show's about. And then you just massage it, just sort of polish it and make sure the audience are going to get that. But another way you can build into it, so a thing I'll do a lot with my shows is sort of give a kind of emotional weight to, like, how do you give an emotional weight to something, which is another sort of meaning, isn't it? Without it being just heavy-handed and sentimental and so if I've spoken about I don't know, a set of keys on a little brown key fob, which had been when my grandfather died and we were allowed to sort of go through his house and keep things for ourselves. I kept this because it was something I used to play with when I was a kid, and I didn't really know what to take, and I saw that and I thought, oh, I'll keep that, and I've just ended up, that's sort of become my way of remembering my granddad. And I might tell that story in a really sort of light way, just talking about something else or having a conversation about stuff. It's not really about a trick at that point. But then, like, later, if I produce this and do a trick with it, you've got all that story, which isn't true in the case about this. I just actually bought this yesterday, but you've got that story, which, without me having to go, now this trick's now about my granddad, because you're doing the work for yourself, you're going, oh, it's the thing he mentioned earlier on. Oh, and it can like get you a little bit, right? And then I don't need to say all the stuff I want you to feel, because I said it earlier when I wasn't seemingly telling you anything important. So there, like, the whole thing's been done really lightly. You and the audience are doing the work for yourself, and suddenly the trick that I then do with this can have a lot more meaning than it would have done otherwise. So I do that a lot in the show, and there's in the current show, there's that sort of structure is used a lot. There's lots of things that I'll set up that then pay off later, and they kind of, ordinary things start to develop a lot of emotional weight in a way that never feels, I never have to say, I'm going to show you a trick now, which, she used to belong to my granddad, and he sold this to me.
Which is the worst thing, right? That's
Pardon?
That's
Yeah,
the worst thing when
it's the worst. It's just the worst things, and you just feel, you feel kind of manipulated, and there's no surprise in it, And sometimes when you see those kind of like Britain's Got Talent, X Factory kind of things that are all a bit sentimental, normally the reason, they work, they get us, but there's not normally any surprises. It's normally just, this is what's happened, and tonight this is for you, grandma, or whatever. There's no surprises in it, but within a course of a show or an act, you can have that. And there's a lovely feeling you get in an audience when something just sort of opens up and you realize that there's a whole layer of something that's suddenly been exposed. Something you didn't think was important is now suddenly really important. Or the set opens up. You've set you've been staring at for 2 hours opens up and it's something else. It's bigger. Or there's a lovely moment at the end of a play that I saw, which I won't say in case anybody still sees it, but you've been following this cast of X number of people. And at the very end, when there's a sense of they've arrived at this place where these memories of past generations of people have lived, somebody walks up from the back of the auditorium up onto, and you think it's just someone that's wandered in, and they walk up and introduce themselves by name to one of the actors, and you go, oh, that's really sweet. That's that name. That was one of the sort of the memories of the people. And then someone else comes in. Or maybe that's someone else that's part of this story. And then about 30 actors.
Wow.
I mean, and you're just sat there going, it's such a huge shift and an incredible ending to a play. So I love those moments that you realize there was so much, like it's like the ground's opened up a bit and there's just so much more. So you find those things by setting up certain expectations or setting up certain parameters, like we've actually got a cast of 80 people, not the 15 that you thought, or and then let those things have their moments. There are ways of doing it that should never feel heavy-handed. And again, what really helps to have a director. Those things are very difficult to work out on your own. I'm not going to get them. I'm facing the wrong way. I mean, I literally don't see the show. So having the people you work with and trust that can just make sure that those things are just right. You know, there's a lot I do. The language I use in the show, a lot of it should feel when I do the show like I'm making it all up. It should feel like I'm finding the language as I go along. But every word, like the terms that I use, because I know I can use that same expression later, and it will just draw a little faint line back to that, and all of that to create those sorts of feelings of like, oh, all of this was much more.
That's a real skill you have as a storyteller. Did you always have that, or was that something you kind of found, the ability, you're so on script, but it just doesn't feel like it?
Doesn't feel like a script. Well, I guess that's an acting thing. And
yeah, totally.
A performing thing. I think that is, like there's often a question that actors get, how do you remember all those lines? But you sort of don't. You don't really remember all the lines. You're just finding, and you do it normally an actor is given a script, right? So it's different and easier for me because I'm kind of writing it in conjunction with the other two, but we're finding it out of my own language and my own thoughts. But if you were handed a script, normally what you would do is you'd write, normally literally writing it in pencil. Why is that character feeling, what have they done in their head to sort of say the things that they're now saying next, because we do it all the time, don't we? Like I'm doing it a lot now. I have half a thought and then I'll maybe go off slightly on something different, and we do it all the time. So you find those things, you write them in pencil, you do those in your head as you're saying the script, but that muscle memory of those little changes in thought produce the words, and then whatever words you're saying trigger the next little change in thought couple of lines later that then triggers the next. So it's actually about that. It's about the stream of feelings that you're having that are sort of being prompted by the words, but they're then prompting the next set of words. So I never sit and learn huge chunks of script.
You don't? No.
No, I don't. And unless there's a particularly difficult bit. And I'd imagine for actors, and certainly the actors I know, it's sort of the same. It's very sometimes starting in the middle of a speech. Sometimes can you do it from there? And it's really hard because you haven't had that kind of emotional sort of lead up to it. No, it's very hard finding them sometimes from scratch. But once I step out, everything flows very naturally because there's like a whole internal stuff that's going on. And if that internal stuff isn't there, that's when it starts to feel like a script. Then you're just saying words that aren't connecting with anything. And it's not just about it making it sound more natural. It's also about how you then remember, whatever, 2.5 hours of what is essentially script, because it is the same every night, but shouldn't feel like it.
Because your show does change and shift and mold throughout its run, doesn't it? I
Yeah.
know that you're known for, if you see the show at the beginning of the tour and the end of the tour, you're seeing very different things.
Yeah. That's I mean, we were lucky with this one because actually the material has pretty much stayed the same. There's one routine we took out, but normally we change a lot. Like the first couple of weeks, it's just like big chunks come out, things we're writing that day and then putting in, and then I'm doing them for the first time. That's a lot to think about. I was lucky with this show there wasn't too much of that because we'd had the whole of lockdown to keep working on it. But yeah, again, I think it's part of the fun, and a week or 2 weeks into the show, it feels like, great, this is it now, this is the show, and you want everyone to come and see it. But I also know that later it's going to be a very different and much better thing, unavoidably. So
so those little your sort of reputation for notorious note taking and never quite being happy, that constant striving to improve the show, is obviously, one, super impressive, but two, is the motivation for that, because you need to make those changes to keep it alive for you because you've got such an intensive run? Or is it just because you care so much about the audience's experience, or a bit of both?
Yeah, I think also the idea of it being the audience's improving the audience's experience by taking these notes and making these tweaks and improving my own, it's all kind of the same thing, because even the very sort of subtle acting-y sort of shifts and things I'll find for myself, they're only there because ultimately they're going to make something in the show a tiny little bit better. So I think the key thing though is to keep the feeling of doing the show alive and present and fresh, and actually making some changes, although obviously you're only going to make changes because they improve it, but they also do help with the experience of doing it. So you are recreating the show every night. Recreating it as opposed to repeating it, which is a distinction. Peter Clifford, an actor friend of mine that some of you will know, first said to me, you want to recreate something, not just repeat it, as in find it fresh every time. So changes help, and keeping on top of just not letting things sink into anything that feels repeated, or it can just start to feel a bit, even just a bit slick. You don't even necessarily want that. I guess it depends on your style, but I certainly don't. I want it to feel like I'm making up my words to the audience. I'm making up my words every night, and that this is stuff that I'm having to be right on the edge of my whatever, on my front feet for, and right, it could go anywhere at any moment. Some of it is like that, and some of it isn't, but that's a much more interesting feeling, I think, in the audience.
Do you think the fact that you're always evolving and growing, you're not a person I would ever describe as sort of, I'm happy with just who I am and I'll stick with that? You're always kind of, you're so self-aware and you're always improving. And do you think that bleeds into the performance? Or do you think the fact that you're searching for new ideas for the show maybe bleeds into your personal life, or a bit both?
I think the personal life bleeds into it. So I wrote a book called Happy years ago, which was really about ancient Greek philosophy and how it can serve us, particularly one area of it called Stoicism. And I spent like 3 years writing that book, and the thoughts in it really affected me. And then they started to affect the work that I was doing. And I think it's really important, especially with something like magic that can be very childish. I mean, it's just like the quickest, most fraudulent route to impressing people, right? And I did years of doing magic around tables in restaurants, and a friend of mine once said, you're like kind of like a step up from a rose seller, aren't you? And it's really true. And like, given how seriously we all take it in the business, it's like really worth remembering that it's quite a childish thing. So it's always important to me to make it about something else. But that's kind of difficult. It's difficult and interesting doing that, because if you painted, or if you danced, or you had some other form of artistic expression, those things are normally rooted in honesty, right? But magic's rooted in dishonesty. So how do you take something that's essentially dishonest and then try and make it say something that's worthwhile and honest? So those answers are never easy to find, but the fact they are, at least, those questions are never easy to answer. But that makes it always interesting for me. So I think having an interest in other things in life, like how we might live well and what it might mean to flourish and, you know, be the best person, and what all that's really, to me, endlessly complicated and interesting and surprising. So that's just become stuff that I bring to the magic, so I can take something that is essentially a bit dishonest and a bit childish and try and do something honest and grown up with it. And then that's probably why I'm still doing it. Otherwise I'd have probably stopped some time ago. But then also, if you stop, you get successful in something, like, it's hard just to walk away from it. So it made more sense to rethink it. That's also why with the TV shows, the early ones are about me going, hey, look, I can do this. And then I start to take more of a back seat, and then you're watching someone else go through some kind of, you know, adventure or drama or something. That seemed much more interesting. Magic, there's a real thing in magic that it's there's a bit of a problem with it, because if you can make anything happen, and this is a lovely thought from Teller, you know, Penn and Teller. So Teller, the little quiet one, is such a brilliant thinker and writer about magic. And he made the point that if you can just click your fingers and make anything happen, that makes you like a god figure, right? And that's sort of like a bit like what magicians are. But that's dramatically really not very interesting for audiences. What we like as audiences are heroes, right? And heroes struggle, like they're trying to get somewhere, but they probably end up somewhere different, but they've learned something along the way, and they face various challenges. And like, that's all the stuff that's interesting. If you can just make anything happen, it's not really that interesting, or at least it's not interesting for very long. So these are all, I think, problems / opportunities and challenges and things to discover if you want to make magic more interesting. And there's all the meat of the stuff you need to think about.
Do you think, and using the term very loosely, failure, do you think sort of learning how to take failure on a stage and use it to your advantage is a core skill?
Oh, it's massive. It's really interesting. And it comes back to this thing of, I think magic is the least interesting part of what we do when we're doing a magic show. So, like, for example, it's not answer to your question, but there was one show a few shows ago when I'm doing a routine that has lots of like multiple climaxes. Not only this, but I knew this, and not only this, but this matches with this, and then he knew this, and and there's so many of them that you feel the audience going with it for a bit, and then this is a bit like, okay, is it finished yet? Yeah, great, well done. Trying to get to the end, right? So adding more magic doesn't make the thing more magical. And so we started experimenting with taking bits out until we found out what the kind of sweet spot was that was enough, but not too much. So that was like a little lesson in, right, so it's not about, you don't put more magic in and then that makes a thing more magical. It's too much. And what I really noticed about failure, and not just failure, but also like disasters in a show, people getting hurt, emergencies and crises and things, what matters is how you deal with all that stuff. It isn't the magic. So like a classic thing, I was at a convention not that long ago. I don't very often go to them. I went to this one, and there was like a sort of magic competition in it, like you often have at these things. And they're not normally very experienced performers. They're probably people that are either hobbyists, or maybe they're out jobbing magicians and they've just sort of, you know, joined in with the competition to try and win the prize. And this guy, I think, was like that. He was definitely good enough that he worked quite a bit, I'm sure. Anyway, it's a tiny stage and someone fell off it right at the start. The person who's got up doing a trick just fell and hit the deck, and it was quite nasty, actually. It was like quite a big drop. But now you've got the guy on stage. You've only got like your 15 minutes to do your act anyway, so he's got a bit of a time pressure on him. And it's suddenly like, it comes back to this thing of like, we all just want to see a human being. So after we've all got over the shock of someone's fallen off, he is now nervously wondering about, does he continue with the act? Does he get back into that? Does he get someone else up? And it's a really interesting human situation. And what you realize very quickly in the audience is that you don't care about that. If he's too eager to get back on with the trick, does anybody else want to come up? Which is what he asked. He's lost everybody. You know, can I get someone else up? Just like the worst thing you should say. And what you actually want is someone to know that their performance at that point isn't that important. And the primary thing is taking care of somebody, making sure they're all right, even if you can't help much yourself from the stage, to give that thing its time. And I had the other night in my own show, someone had an epileptic fit in the audience, and we had to stop the show for 22 minutes. It was a really long time when you don't know how long it's going to stop. And I know it's like the worst thing I can do is start to make sort of little jokes about it because time is dragging on, and that kind of out of a sort of nervousness. So, you just have to let the thing sit. And likewise with failure, when things go wrong, it's like when you see a comic fail. I mean, that's fine if gags don't work, but when they start blaming the audience for it, that's when it becomes excruciating. And again, it's just it's the human thing that's most interesting. It's just seeing somebody deal badly with something that's where it really all starts to go wrong. So it is really important. It's always horrible when things fail, at least the first time. But if you do a show every night, every bit will go wrong at some point. Every bit will fall flat in its face. You'll just be amazed that something that felt watertight will just happen. I'm doing the show 350 something times, so that's like more than enough for every moment to go wrong at some point. And it doesn't matter too much if something goes wrong and the trick doesn't work. And B, particularly on stage, it's amazing how much you can get away with just acting like it doesn't matter, just picking the thing up that you've dropped and putting it where it needs to be and just not paying any attention to it. Because people don't know, like you thinking, oh my God, everyone's just seen the thing, but no one knows what the thing is. They don't know that's important. And I'm amazed at how many, there was a card trick I do in the show that I just completely forgot to do the method one night. I'd been a bit ill and I'd taken too much cough medicine or something. And I was just my head was a bit out of the show. And I had this card trick. It's like I'm watching the card trick and I'm not doing it. And I get to the end of it and I realize, oh, I haven't done any of the methods. So it's like, it's just not going to work. I just haven't done it. So I had to do some really bad stuff to try and just fumble it towards some sort of ending. I mean, it was terrible. If you were watching it, if you were sat at the table watching it, it would have been like, it just embarrassing, like a child trying to do a magic trick. But somehow on stage, I don't know, it sort of seemed to just kind of fly by. So a lot of it it doesn't matter. It's amazing what you can get away with. Every time something fails, you not only got to think about, okay, well, how do I make that not happen? Of course, you don't want it to happen again, but also, how did I deal with that? Is there a better way I could deal with that next time? And then, that's really, that is important. And then for all of that, if nothing fails, introduce a bit of failure to make yourself human.